Den här eftermiddagen ska handla om jobb och vi kommer ha en mängd olika talare från hela Europa som på olika sätt kommer berätta om exempel, om strategier och om framtid. Vår keynote speaker, han är utnämnd till att vara en av de mest lovande unga ledarna i Europa, en av de 30 mest lovande ledarna. Det är rätt spännande det, va? Bara det. Han tillhör en tankesmedja som ligger under Europeiska kommissionen. Och det han ska berätta om, det är mer tankesmedjans synsätt. Det vill säga, det är inte alltid att det exakt går hand i hand med den politik som finns på själva kommissionen. Det kan vara bra att känna till, för att annars så kommer han få stå till svars för rätt så mycket. Men han har många spännande tankar och insikter kring hur det är med framtidens jobb i Europa, något som berör oss alla. Välkommen upp, Leonardo Quattrucci. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So actually, my boss, Ann Mettler, is originally from Malmö, and she would have loved to be here and try to give me a crash course in Swedish, but I don't learn fast enough, so I will speak in English. And you know, thinking about the future of work, if I asked you what keeps you up at night, it would probably be this. Our lingering concern is how can we be and do whatever we want to sustain ourselves and our families and our communities. And I often go to my high school to have this conversation with students because I find children the way to keep our visions fresh and our thoughts grounded. And last time I had a surprising conversation. If you ask children like the ones that were dancing just outside, what do you imagine you want to do when you grow up? They usually tell you, I want to be a writer. These days they tell you, I want to be a computer scientist, which I couldn't even imagine. And this time, a little girl raised her hand and said, why should I prepare if I know a robot will do work for me? And that to me, it's puzzling, because when you think about the future of work and you talk to children, you usually imagine possibilities, but actually, much of our conversation in media and actually now with ourselves, with each other, has been reduced to, what jobs will precisely be automated and by when. And what I want to do today is not talk about the future of work, because I personally don't believe in the future. I believe in the choices we make today to have a much deeper reflection, because the future of work is not about that. It's not just about automation and seeing it as the apocalypse now. It's about how do we preserve our European way of life, which made us famous and unique in a world that is changing profoundly. And fighting gravity, by the way, has never been a successful endeavor. So let's look for opportunities. And what is the role of social innovators in this, who have been trained to scout for opportunities and address those needs that were not addressed before? I would argue we are best placed to be network leaders, to galvanize what I would call a politics of service, which realizes that in the uncertain and complex world we live in, we have to bring everybody together to focus on interests and not positions, not on the particular question, but on the broader picture. And by the way, if you just take a moment to look at each other, you will see that we're best placed to do that. We're healthier and wealthier than ever before. In this room, you have the smartest and fittest people humankind has ever produced. We have eradicated diseases, we have pushed poverty to its historical lows, and we have created the most successful peace project, the European Union, that has made us share prosperity in unprecedented ways. Now, that prosperity is going to be shared by fewer of us. Europe will be, a smaller part of the world population in the future, which means that cities will look more like this. 70% of the world population will live in cities. And that means in Europe particularly, that in this crowd that you see in the screen, we won't look as much as each other today. We'll be more dense and more diverse, which means that we'll have more social capital and opportunities to innovate. But it also means that we'll have to think hard about how do we live in an urbanity that is more inclusive and it offers opportunity for everybody? That's for me the question about the future of work. And in that crowd, you will see less young people. 55 in 10 years in Europe will be the new 65. We're going to grow older. More than 14% of the European population will be about 65. And less of that 2 billion young people under 35 will be in and from Europe. What does that mean? It means that to sustain our way of life, to sustain that European way of life, we're going to have to think more smartly, in a smarter way about how we invest that social spending that today, by the way, it's highest than ever before. We complain about governments and welfare, but we have never spent so much in making each other healthier and wealthier. But we're spending it probably in the wrong way, because we're trying to sustain. So if you look at today, there are 3 active people amongst this crowd for every inactive person. So the question becomes, who will sustain that inactive person that is probably going to be 2 in 2 or 3 decades? And how do we empower those active people, the younger generation, but also the older generation? That's why social innovators are so important. At 65 today, you can still have your chance and contribute to the economy. So how do we do that? And you know, we have a twin challenge, which is our youth today is twice less likely to find employment in many countries than the older generation. But by the way, digital empowerment is helping younger people, especially my generation, the so-called millennials, to find new ways to put their tasks to useful uses. We're creating self-employment. We have an army of entrepreneurs on the rise and new ways of doing business. Not just here, but from here to, I don't know, Hong Kong, just with one click. At the same time, the modern world is a little bit taxing. So we have to think that the future of work is also the future of health, because a less healthy population is a less productive population. So how do we preserve that way of life given this picture? And by the way, here come the robot. And the robot come, you know, with a promise that if there is a routine task that can be automated, there is a chance it will. And as I said before, you know, let's not try to fight gravity, but let's try to scout for opportunities. And robots can offer us opportunities, actually, and we've seen it already. Being more human makes us more resilient in the workplace that's going to change. And we've seen that, so if you look at the line that goes up, that's the skills and the jobs that were proved more resilient after the financial crisis in 2008. And so by more human, I mean that if we automate those tasks and those jobs that are mechanical and redundant, even when performed by people, we could alleviate the burden that we saw in non-communicable diseases and reinvest in training people to do jobs that are more rewarding and fulfilling. So here comes the real question about the future of work. How do we empower ourselves to not be future takers, but be future makers? So how do we look at that robot? Do we see it as a threat, or do we see it as an opportunity to take care of our elderly and give access to people with disabilities as we reinvest social spending and resources in the younger and more active generation, and even in a generation that even above 65 can still reinvent themselves? You know, my grandfather, before he passed away, the last thing he did was take a computer science class, because he said, I'm retired, but I haven't stopped working. I don't want to stop working. I see so many possibilities around me. So what are we going to do? What we're going to do, or we should do, is, as I said, galvanize resources around not the particular positions, but around the shared interests we have. And you know, governments and the world we live in is giving us the policy playground to actually experiment and innovate, at least in 3 ways, to make an economy and a society thrive in the 21st century. Number 1, the European Commission is not trying to square the circle anymore, it's circling the square, which means that we've understood that the circular economy today, retaining value in the way we consume and produce, is not a desire, it's a necessity. We cannot afford to waste capital, whether it's natural capital, because we're reaching the boundaries of our planet and we have to fight climate change, or human capital. So what does it mean? It means that when we make an investment, like we did with the European Fund for Strategic Investment in France, we try to think about not just refurbishing 40,000 buildings, but the broader picture. So if you take the construction sector in this case, this was a sector that after the crisis suffered enormous jobs losses. These low-skilled workers have a hard time finding new employment and new possibilities. With a circular logic, when you invest in 40,000 apartments in Paris to make her smarter and more sustainable, you're also training people who others would have said they were doomed to reinvent themselves and equip them with smarter capacities and techniques. So refurbishing buildings made them more sustainable, brought more people into employment, and made households save money. The same concept I've seen applied to prison and prisoners. So there are companies with government's license and incentives that are entering prisons to teach prisoners digital skills. And before we were thinking, prisoners, they don't contribute to society. Actually, they don't contribute until you give them an incentive to be motivated, to be resilient to the future of work, so that they can reintegrate better when their punishment is over, and contribute while they are in prison. The second C is collaborative, because in this economy, in the 21st century, it's not enough to retain value, but you have to share value. And it just makes sense. This proves that solidarity is not just a nice thing to do, it actually makes economic sense. How many of you own a car of their own? You see? Oh my God, I don't. I don't think I will ever, because when you buy a car, on average, 92% of the time, you leave it parked. You're taking out space, creating traffic that we then complain about, and polluting. With a collaborative economy, you can take that car and share it with people that maybe before didn't even have access to mobility and had a hard time get to the city to work. I visited last week a community that is bootstrapping itself out of energy poverty through the sharing economy. They're using smart technologies and smart devices so that if I have a solar panel that is producing excess electricity, which you need to use fast, otherwise it goes to waste, and you, my neighbor, right, don't have the money to afford the electricity bill, we can suddenly trade instantly that electricity that would have gone to waste and bring you into the world of electricity and electrification. Lower cost, and by the way, we're not just transacting prices or costs or energy, we're transacting values. That's the politics of service. We're transacting solidarity. The third C is connectivity, because I don't think the collaborative economy or the circular economy would work as well and as effectively without the digital infrastructures that today permeate our societies. And by the way, it makes no sense anymore to talk about the digital economy, because the economy is digital. Not only that, our interactions are digital. Our devices that we use, anything you do today is connected to a digital device, more or less. The biggest country in the world, Facebook. So, connectivity is also the key to a future where we don't see uncertainty, but within uncertainty, as a poet I love, Rebecca Solnit, says, we can scout for wider possibilities and specific perspectives. And so, digital skills are the ones, and that's why the Commission is investing so much in the skills agenda, are the ones that are going to enable us not to try and resist displacement here and there, but to actually be resilient to whatever changes will occur in the job market. Because adaptability is the key to a future with more employment and more creation of employment. And by the way, Sweden got it right. In the 1990s, you invested in giving every child a laptop, or digital skills, actually. Because it's not the hardware that matters, it's what you do with it. And today, the son of an immigrant has become one of the most successful CEOs in Europe, right? Klarna is pretty successful and innovative company in Europe. We can repeat that story, and that's exactly the story that we should repeat. And by the way, with an instant click today, we can save lives thanks to connectivity. There are drones I saw that are used not to hack our systems, but to transport medicines to rural areas that I know, for example, exist in Sweden. That means that an ambulance would have never gotten to save that life, but we now can with a simple click. And that's why the European Commission is bringing connectivity to every village, so that we can expand our digital imagination and engineer solutions for the future work we want. So if you look at this system, it is 3 C's, circular, collaborative, connective. What you actually see is that in the world we live in, of course, we're empowered to imagine ourselves in many more ways, but value is only created when we come together. We're individually stronger when we are collectively united. That's why solidarity is not just a value that is at the core of what we do, but it makes sense, and ever more in the 21st century. And so here comes the question. Do we try and figure out, the maths of that it's in any case impossible at the moment of how many jobs will be displaced and try to fight gravity? Or do we try to absorb those technologies to make them work for us? Do we imagine the future work and automation, particularly as an earthquake that's going to bring a house down on us? Or, like it happened in my country on the 24th of August, when an earthquake occurs and the tragedy makes you feel like that, things will never be the same before. Accidents like that, you think they are persistent, permanent, pervasive, and you take them personally because you ask yourself, what could I do? Well, what you can do is look at this picture and think that what you're seeing is young and old, robots and non, old immigrants and asylum seekers and civil servants and volunteers come together in a moment of service, understanding that that interest they share is actually larger than their particular positions. So my question to you today, and my answer to that little girl who told me she doesn't want to study because she thinks a robot will take care of her, is, do you want to be future makers or future takers? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's stay with the discussion with the robots. How do you see the future work? What will the robots do, and what will be left for us, humans?
So as I said, for us, the robots are a possibility to do what is more human and rewarding, And of course the question is, how many of us are equipped to go in entrepreneurship and into creative jobs? That's exactly probably the kind of investment we should make. We should invest in people today to have more entrepreneurs tomorrow. And I do think that the technologies we have, the collaborative economy, can give us new hats. We have to just think hard about it, and a community like this can actually collect resources to make each of us an entrepreneur.
But is everyone, into to be like the humans' work would be being entrepreneur, being creative, being dynamic, and all that. But is everyone want to be that, or it's actually I just want to have a work that maybe is not that creative, but it's give me income and stability and that kind of thing. What do you do with everyone who wants to be in that kind of part of society?
That's why I speak about a future work that is a conversation not about what's going to happen, but how do we fit our values into the world that's changing. And I try, I don't focus on one, but it's broader than that. You're right. We have a question of how do we pay for health services? How do we sustain our societies? And that's why, I think a community like that needs to become not just a community of social innovators, but of network leaders to have that tough conversation. There are experiments like guaranteed minimum income in places like Finland, for example. If that is the solution, I don't know today. But I think that's the kind of policy experimentation and ethical conversation that we should have today in order to be, more existentially confident tomorrow. that's a fundamental part. If we decide to be complacent about it, we're not going to see possibilities to figure that puzzle out. And we figured many puzzles out in history, so I think we can figure this one out as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the Finnish example, because we do have a speaker later on who will talk about the Finnish experiment with salary, medborgarlön, lön, and that would be very interesting shortly coming up. Okay, but how? When you are talking about this, the circular, the collaborative, the connective economy, how is the differences between the different countries? Is everyone thinking this is an interesting way? Is that the right path?
Listen, of course, one size has never fit all. The beauty of these models is that you have to create the right conditions and the right incentives, and then, you know, the way the solution will be designed is figured out from the bottom up. So surely, you know, there are experiments, you know, circular economy models that work in one place but don't work in the other. The logic is the same. So I think what especially policymakers are trying to do is give the right incentives to then get innovators like the ones in the room and those outside the room to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and we have to experiment and learn from it. The example I mentioned with energy poverty would have never happened to the admission of the start-uppers without a license from the government to say, you know, these are the incentives, try and do it. If it fails, we'll have learned why it failed. But at least we're trying, and we're getting people out of poverty and make them part of the solution. So doing things with people, not just for people.
But when you, personally, I really think it's interesting with your vision of the future society. But I also can see clashes between the society we have today with the not only the government but the industry, the business, the traditional business. How will you think it will be in the future? Will they change, or will there be a confrontation, or how will we reach this solidarity society?
I don't want to repeat myself, but I think this is a question of, are you trying to fight gravity or are you not? Because what these new economic models and social models show, that actually value is created by interaction, right? And by that I don't just mean platform economy, but I also mean new way of venturing and partnering with people and organizations. So what the Commission is trying to do now is actually launching is it's called innovation deals, and it comes from the inspiration of the Dutch Green Deals. And what it did was, let's look at the challenges we have, and let's bring different actors to the table to think hard about, remove the obstacles that get us from A to B, and find, you know, people, public-private partnerships to solve them. And another example of that, you know, companies that will grow more if they do it inclusively and in a way that shows, that embraces solidarity in the politics of service, is an Italian paint shop. So that paint shop was almost bankrupt in 2008. And the CEO did not lay off one single employee, contrary to everybody else. What he did was, let's sell our wealth and figure out how long we can survive. And that was 2 years. And then he said, okay, I'll do three things. I'll invest all my money in sending people around the world to learn from the best and figure out what works. Train every employee to become an innovator and skill up. And 3, invest in green technologies. Today, JICO is growing at a 40% annual rate. It's bigger than before, and it's getting awards for innovation from everybody. So that's why I say that solidarity is not just, you know, it's not just a nice thing, but it makes sense.
But when you tell us that we should not have the cars and we should sell the cars and share it, maybe a company like Volvo is not really signing through that. You know, they don't really would like us to do that. So how are you going to? Will we meet the traditional business? Because I don't really think they will join it. Even they will maybe will be resist anyway. Even if you say you should not. I'm
not saying you should. I'm giving you examples, but I think, you know, Volvo they invest hard in innovation, they'll figure out a way. By the way, Renault is an interesting case that I know of. Maybe Volvo is doing the same, and I don't know. But they're find ways to for example, produce and consume in a smarter way through the circular economy.
Do you think that this change will come within the big corporates, or will there be new corporates that have new business models?
I think it comes from both.
More than I was thinking of you. You are working very close to the European Commission. The think tank is a part of the European Commission. How work in Europe? How much can actually the European Commission do for creating work? Do you think?
Well, what is doing is investing first, making growth and jobs, and delivering them in sustainable ways. The priority number one. And number two is investing, like the example that I told you, and in a smart way with, by the way, partners, so private companies and other organizations. And three is setting up the conditions to galvanize resources. So setting up a framework that incentivizes circular, collaborative, and connective ways to enter the 21st century and make the economy thrive.
We are talking about social innovations here for 2 days. What role is social innovation play in all this new work agenda, do you think?
Well, listen, to me, in a sense, social innovation is mission accomplished. In a sense that we figured out, and data show, that progress is the result of profit making that is purposeful. If you don't have profit and purpose are two sides of the same coin, and that's how progress emerges. And the world leaders recognized that 2 months ago at the G20. If you read the declaration, they say that breaking new paths for growth means innovating in a sustainable and inclusive way. So the role of social innovators to me now is to be network leaders, like I said before, to be the pioneers of this politics of service that makes sure that no talent is wasted, and no talent is wasted on particular positions, but converges on shared interests.
Finally, what did you say to the girl in the classroom?
Well, listen, I said that she should study hard, first of all, and then we'll figure out what she do in the future. But for now, it's important. And I understood, I studied, I was there at classical studies, translating Greek. And I asked myself, why am I wasting my time and being so frustrated rather than playing ball? But actually, doing that helped me then understand that uncertainty is actually just a mask for hidden possibilities.
Thank you so much for coming, Leonardo Quattrucci.
Thanks to you. Thank you.
I give you will have, Leonardo, you will have some Malmö chocolate before leaving.
Oh, thank you so much.